Sometimes there's power in being on the outside. It was a cold day in August 1947. Actually, you know what? I don't even know what the weather was, but it sounded cool to say it like that. But it was August 1947 in Edinburgh, Scotland, at the very first international festival. And there were 8 theater groups that showed up and realized that they weren't on the list. And if you've ever been that guy who went to the club and the bouncer wouldn't let you in, I imagine that that's kind of how they felt. But instead of trying to sneak in through the back door or say that they were with the band, they decided to leave in peace. They had a lot of options, but they were creative, so instead of making this thing feel like something that was broken, they decided to do something a little bit different. They were pushed to the outskirts of town, and there they set up shop. They decided that no matter how many people told them no, their talent still existed, so they would take their talents to the outskirts of the city, set up shop, create their own scene, and do their own show right there. On the pathway to the main event, people would have to stop and see them. These were outliers, people on the outskirts who decided that their yes was going to be bigger than the no's that they had received. I know what it feels like to be an outsider. Sometimes you feel powerless. Like when people laugh at your picture from 4th grade. You know, 4th grade is awkward in general, but it's even more awkward when you're the new kid at school. Transferred in the middle of the school year, fresh off of a Christmas break. It was 1987. I remember when I got off of the bus, I just stared at the building. It was huge, it was dark, it was cold, and I was alone. And I didn't really know how to take this all in. I just felt like this overwhelming loneliness. I was an outlier. I was kind of a nerd. I know you can't tell that by the picture, but you know, I was into poetry and Mad Magazine and photography and art. I just drew all the time. And I was into doing things my own way, which of course my parents didn't really appreciate, and my teachers appreciated it less. So I found myself in the principal's office pretty often. I was just different. And I was so different, in fact, that my parents, at their wits' end, decided that I needed to see a specialist because clearly I'm special. And had a diagnosis of ADHD. And in 4th grade, you know, having this thing that you're carrying and this new label doesn't help the case. You know, it's one of those things where now I already had issues fitting into a certain group, and now I wasn't even allowed to sit with a certain group because now my desk was uncomfortably pressed against the teacher's desk, and we sat side by side. But sometimes moving from comfort zones is what moves you into those outlier positions. It was winter 2011. A couple friends had helped me load up a truck. My wife and I, our entire lives were in this truck. And we were making a journey from Indianapolis to Cincinnati. She got a job here, so we were following her dreams. I was doing graphic design, so I could do that anywhere. And so we packed up, moved 100 miles south, left everything behind. We moved here with no family, no friends, one job, one U-Haul, and a Chevy with transmission issues. But we were together. But I didn't really find my position because the very first time that I went to a networking event, I realized quickly that I was an outlier. I think it was the 3rd person that asked me what high school I went to. Yeah, thanks, Cincinnati. I realized then that I was far from home, and then I felt like it was 4th grade all over again. It was cold, it was dark, and I was alone. And you don't really realize how alone you are until it's you and your wife moving an extra wide couch up an extra narrow flight of stairs alone in the dark with the backdrop of a cold Cincinnati sky with no help. We realized then that we were now outliers in Cincinnati. I was scrolling through Instagram one day, and I recognized that a friend of mine from Indianapolis had posted a picture with Taste of Belgium, and I was confused. I was like, is Taste of Belgium coming to Indianapolis? He was like, no, I'm in Cincinnati. And I was like, thanks for calling and letting me know. I had to find out on your Instagram feed, Derek. And outlier again. I mean, just can't get in. But it was really interesting because he said that he was moving to Cincinnati, and a couple weeks later, he set up a meeting. It was me, Derek, and a friend of his from college named William. And we sat and we had an awesome conversation about entrepreneurship. And we talked about what it looks like in Cincinnati and what's missing from the entrepreneurial landscape and who are the outliers in that situation. In May 2014, we started a group called MORTAR. Our sole purpose with MORTAR was to create a dynamic where people in the inner city, in low-income neighborhoods and neighborhoods that were shifting and changing would be able to have an opportunity to start businesses right in their own community. So we thought, what kind of construction terms can we use that make sense? And MORTAR was the name that we came up with because it's the thing that holds everything together. So when we think of the people in communities, they are what holds everything together. Whether you have buildings or cool parks, none of that stuff matters if you don't have people who care. And we care. So after we started that program, we decided that there were some other things that we could do. We were the outliers. And we were then placed in a position to start a movement. We started this movement with entrepreneurship classes. And we have people who've been incarcerated or homeless or single parents or people who just have had some type of struggle. But then we also have people who are college graduates and people who have successful careers and they just want to pursue this other passion, but they felt like there was something on the outskirts for them. So we started this movement. After we started the classes, we figured that there was something else that we should do. So we created a network of pop-up shops, and God literally gave me this in a dream and said that even if they learn how to start a business, they need a place to start a business. So we started a pop-up shop in Over the Rhine. It's 400 square feet. It was pretty easy to do. A little bit of paint and a little bit of sweeping. And that wasn't enough. It wasn't enough of a challenge. We decided to step outside of our comfort zone and look for something more. On a trip to Walnut Hills, we walked around the neighborhood with the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation, and we went from empty building to empty building to empty building, searching for this place. And none of them spoke to me. It was just like you walk in, it's like, yeah, no. But then we rolled up the steel gate on the former Dollar City. And when we walked in, I knew that this was the space. It was 10,000 square feet of massive potential. Or at least that's how I saw it. Derek on the other side did not see it the same way. And I looked at him and I told him, I said, this is it. And he said, no. And I said, yes. And he said, no. And I said, maybe. And he said, we'll sleep on it. We came back a week later. And as I looked around, I discovered a lot of things. Random things, like wigs and hats, baby lotion. There was some silverware, lots of hangers, some mannequin heads, and like a whole bunch of fragments of like counterfeit bills. That was really interesting. And I asked Derek, I was like, well, who put this stuff in here? Like, this wasn't here the first time we came, right? He was like, no, it was completely here. And I have this tendency to walk around with optimism goggles on, and so I didn't see any of this stuff the first time. But he agreed that we could do this transformation. And so we started working on the building, started to clean it up, get volunteers to come and help us paint, sweep, clean, vacuum, toss things out. We filled up the dumpster about 12 times. And in the process, we were transforming as the building was transforming. There was something there, something that felt like a sense of purpose and calling in this building. But I needed a break. So my wife and I went on a journey. We took a road trip to Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm kind of a museum nerd, and so I looked up what cool museums were in Greensboro. There was a museum called the International Civil Rights Museum. And I GPSed it. When we arrived, I looked around and I couldn't find it. I saw a couple restaurants, a music venue, a coffee shop, a big Woolworths, a corner store, and I had no idea. So I hit Street View, and apparently it was inside of the Woolworths. And as a graphic designer and a branding guy, I just started to rip into these people like, well, you could at least take the sign down and let us know that this is where it was. And I soon found out that this was not some branding snafu. This was hallowed ground. On February 1st, 1960, 4 students from North Carolina A&T decided that they were outliers. They went over to the Woolworth store, made a few purchases, and then went and sat at the whites-only counter, where they were told no. So they continued to sit. The media arrived, and they were told no, and they continued to sit. The police arrived, they were told no, and they continued to sit. They sat there until the place closed. The next day, they got up, they came back. This time, instead of 4 people, there were 36. And they sat there all day, being told no, being talked about, being spit on. On February 5th, 300 students showed up, being told no, being talked about, being spit on, being punched, being kicked, being assaulted, being arrested. But they decided that their yes was bigger than the no that the South tried to give them. By the end of the summer, Woolworths integrated all of their food counters. I took this lesson back with me to Cincinnati, and it just stayed with me. This experience would not leave me alone. And I went back to the brick pop-up shop in Walnut Hills and continued to clean and paint. And there would always be people who would walk into the space. And they would come and ask questions like, what are you guys doing? And we were telling them, well, this is the vision for what we have. We want to do a marketplace where entrepreneurs in the community can come together and they can sell their goods or provide their services. And, all of these things we want to do. But what do you want us to do? A lot of times we look at communities and say that the people who live there are not interested or they don't care. And it's not that they don't care, it's just that we haven't cared enough to ask them what they care about. So MORTAR has chosen to do development differently. We want to do equitable redevelopment where we invest opportunities into the citizens of these communities. So I came back and an older gentleman walked up to me. He had dark chocolate skin, wrinkled hands grabbing his cane and steadying his steps. And he asked if we were tearing the building down. And I said, no, sir, we're building the building up. And he let out a sigh of relief. And he said, this building's been through a lot of transitions in my whole time living in this community. But this place has special significance to me. See, I met my wife here. I remember walking in and she was sitting over there at the counter. And I said, this is going to be my wife. This store used to be a Woolworths. And it took everything in me to not just break down into tears because I finally realized why the building spoke to me, why God sent these dreams to me, why everything had this sense of purpose while we were there. And over the course of those next couple months, we built up this place. And we added an art gallery, and we added a theater room. And we've continued to do this because it's about legacy for us. It's never been about us. It's always been bigger than us. And we are connecting to the past by building the future. We are future history now. And MORTAR will continue to invest in those outliers, those people on the outskirts who have tried to build their own community. We are the outcasts. And when it's time to change the world, There's only one group of people that you can depend on: the people who won't accept the status quo, the people who will say yes when the world says no. We are the outliers. Thank you.